it was 30 years actually since I was Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. That's a long time ago, and sadly a lot of the challenges are still the same in health, education, employment and so on. There have been significant improvements. I mean, I wouldn't have dreamt that we'd have 100 plus Aboriginal doctors, lots of other professionals in the law, in accountancy, in business, in research, fantastic Aboriginal art movement that's internationally acclaimed. I mean, there are a lot of good things that have happened in the last 30 years, but I think it's also true to say that we were struggling 30 years ago to get it right, and I think despite all the good intentions, we're still struggling. The previous Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, I think did a magnificent job in delivering a long overdue apology. But he said one other thing that I thought was really important around that time. He said, perhaps we're not looking for 100 solutions, perhaps we're looking for 200 solutions. And I think, unfortunately, governments found it very hard to act on that Prime Ministerial advice. There's still a look for solutions which are overall instead of solutions which are locally based and fit what you're trying to do with. In the end, all solutions are local. Say you want to improve the health, education and employment record of Aboriginal people. Well, every child is educated one at a time in a classroom. Every issue of health is something about the individual as well as the community in which they live. Every employment job involves, every bit of employment involves an individual in a workplace. Mm-hmm. So there's an immense amount of subjectivity in all that. I think we've learned a lot in the last 30 or 40 years about how to do things, and if you look at the agreement the Commonwealth and the States have made on remote service delivery, you'll find all of the things that I think should be written down are written down. There's a whole schedule about engaging with the Aboriginal community. In the agreement itself there are statements that you should work with the community, but the problem is that the timetable for government action is often totally inconsistent with actually getting the Aboriginal engagement they talk about. It's not something you do overnight. I mean, the thing I'd say about government is that for as long as I've been around, which goes back a very long way, there have been a lot of good intentions. And the problem is not people wanting to do the right thing, the problem is knowing how to do the right thing. And we should have learned by now that the old centralised bureaucratic ways have not worked. A lot of effort, a lot of money, a lot of goodwill, and the results have not been commensurate with that. So I guess what I'm asking for is a really fundamental rethink in the way government goes about its business in Aboriginal communities, whether we're talking about remote communities or indeed in metropolitan communities, rather than just an endless search for a new policy which might work using the old tools. You can set employment targets, but in the end, those employment targets will be met branch by branch, office by office. And all the central direction in the world won't work unless there is a local engagement. The local people want this to happen, are engaging with Aboriginal people, in this case the employees, in a positive way, and making it happen. Aboriginal people, like anybody else, operate best when they're in a good, positive relationship with people. Why will anyone stay working for NAB if they're not surrounded by people who actually respect and like them? I mean, I think it's such an obvious point. We all flourish best when we're in a friendly, positive environment, and we shrivel when we're in an unfriendly environment. I'm not suggesting it's a universal solution, but I'm suggesting we need thousands of small solutions like that to get on top of this. And everything that I've seen that has succeeded has been strongly locally based and based on a terrific sense of respect for Aboriginal people, because it's with respect for Aboriginal people that you get their engagement. There are huge opportunities for NAB here. If you look at it just as a business proposition, apart from the good corporate citizen side, which is also so important, Aboriginal people are coming into the real economy in a huge way because, quite apart from anything else, native title has transformed the landscape. Since 1995, the mining industry has seen Aboriginal people as genuine stakeholders who have to be taken into account. Aboriginal people are faced with a whole range of new problems, including managing large cash flows, long-term investments, structures which will permit their economic as well as social development. And these things all need expert external help. So there's a good market here for a bank, and NAB is entitled to compete for that space, and the more it accepts that this is a long-term commitment, the more likely it is to succeed. It's really worth going back to the little ceremony that NAB had in Melbourne to mark the first anniversary of its Reconciliation Action Plan. The start of it was, of course, when the Prime Minister launched at Parliament House, which was a great event. But the first, Auntie Joy, as she's known, gave a welcome to country, and she made the point, not aimed at NAB, I think, but saying that she and her family and Aboriginal people were pretty sick of promises. And the point that I made in response to Auntie Joy, that was precisely what was good about the NAB approach, and indeed the whole RAP approach. The promises are in writing, and you're accountable for those promises, and you report on delivery. Aboriginal people are very familiar with carpetbaggers. Aboriginal people are very familiar with public servants and politicians like me who come and go. After all, there have been how many ministers for Aboriginal Affairs since I was around? We all come and go. What Aboriginal people want are stable, consistent allies and supporters. They are great responders to longevity in the field. In part, I'm able to deal happily with many communities because people remember that their parents knew me. I really can't stress hard enough that this is a long distance race. Sprinters are not of much use. I've been to lots of celebrations of sprinters setting off to solve issues in a year, a month or whatever. They usually disappear very quickly. The people who contribute, the banks that contribute, NAB's contribution in the end will be measured on its stamina and its capacity to capture what I think is going to be a very important market will depend upon not only business efficiency, but a high degree of commitment and principle.